chapter.
I'm gonna mute everyone, so you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Kelly.
Am I muted? You can hear me?
You need to unmute now, please.
Okay, very good. Okay, we are on Perek chapter 3, verse 21. So if you have your Koran edition, it's on page 80. And these are the words of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Okay, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, Im ein Torah ein derech eretz. If there is no Torah, okay, the Koran edition translates it as respect. If there is no Torah, there is no respect. If there is no respect, there is no Torah. And it goes on. If there is no wisdom, there is no fear or reverence. If there is no reverence, there is no wisdom. If there is no knowledge, there is no understanding. If there is no understanding, there is no knowledge. If there is no flour, it's actually the word kemach, or sustenance, there is no Torah. If there is no Torah, there is no flour. Okay, so we have a sort of funny thing going on here, which is if there is no X, there is no Y, but in order to have Y, you need X. So in each of these sayings, what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is essentially saying is these are symbiotic relationships. There's no one without the other. And once you have the other, then you can reach the other side. But they're symbiotically attached, meaning without one, there is no other. Without that other, there is no one. So what we want to do is understand what each of them are and really apply it to our lives. So the very first example that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says is Im ein Torah ein derech eretz. If there's no Torah, there's no good conduct. Im ein derech eretz ein Torah. If there's no good conduct or respect, there is no Torah. So here we have kind of, there are different ways of understanding the word derech eretz. Colloquially, we say derech eretz for being a mensch. So you could essentially say, if there's no Torah, there's no, I'll say it in Yiddish, there's no menschlichkeit. There's no real ethical, moral behavior. If there's no ethical, moral behavior, there is no Torah. Okay, so there's different ways to understand derech eretz, but one of the ways that we understand it, probably the easiest way to understand it is just to be a mensch, is to be a good person. So what the commentators tell us is really there's two levels. Okay, this is really important to understand and kind of internalize. The first level is basic human decency. Just basically being a mensch, basic human decency. And for that, our sages tell us the human being without the Torah should be and is able to intuit basic human decency. I read a verse, I want to read this to you. It's from the Talmud. If the Torah had not been given, we would have been expected to learn laws of decent conduct from observing nature, respect of private property from the ant, fidelity from the dove. We might ask, however, without Torah, how would we have known which are the desirable animal traits to emulate? Perhaps we would have learned rapaciousness from tigers and promiscuity from dogs. What would have guided us to the proper observations? So, okay, in other words, what this is basically saying is the human being can intuit basic human decency from nature alone without the Torah. But really, if you look at nature, how would we intuitively know which behaviors to emulate? And I think it was Reb Yecheskel Lowenstein, who was a rabbi from the previous century in Europe. He says something very powerful. And I, if you think about it, it's very powerful. He says, can you imagine a child with shoes that are way too big and a shirt that's like falling off of his arms and pants that are falling off of his legs? Everything's too big. Rabbi Lowenstein says, this is the person who doesn't understand that I was given something so extraordinary. I was given human intelligence and human ability to discern and incredible, unique human abilities. If I was given all of this intelligence and uniquely human capabilities just to fulfill my pleasure needs, my sensual needs, my immediate gratification needs, I would have been better off without this unique human intelligence. In other words, we would be better, Rabbi Lowenstein is essentially saying, as human beings. And I think when we look at the world, we can sort of see this. Maybe we would have been better not having this vast human potential, because if we don't use it in the right direction, then it's actually a liability to have human potential. And I think a lot of what we're seeing in the world, where people are suffering so deeply in life right now, a lot of it's pointing to the fact of perhaps we don't really know how to really develop our unique human capacities. So we don't need the remarkable mental and spiritual and transcendent human capacities that people are endowed with just to fulfill our animal needs. But if we're just fulfilling our sensory, immediate gratification needs, A, we'd be better off without these unique human capacities, and B, we are, as they say in Hebrew, dafka, we are going to suffer from these human capacities. And that's exactly what you're seeing in the world today, where people are suffering because they're not necessarily acting in alignment with and according to like the incredible powers that they have. That was a Mishnah that we had, I think 2 or 3 Mishnahs ago, which was, blessed is the human being that he's created or she's created in the divine image. But even greater, that God in the Torah tells the human being that he or she is created in the divine image. Because we really, really have a lot. The fact that we are body, and we are soul, and we have a unique divine ability in us, makes us very, very powerful. I think one of the things I do the most with clients that I have in coaching, and God willing, soon in therapy, when I get my master's, which is on the horizon, one of the things that I do all the time with them is recognize that even from a very early age, we develop I call it like a shame cycle. I didn't coin that, but a shame cycle means it's where we go to. Every single one of us has a kind of negative spin cycle, a negative cycle that we kind of go in where some sort of event will trigger a sort of negative series of thoughts that create our physiological or emotional feelings, and we act accordingly. So human beings have this sort of the negative place that each of us will go. Maybe for one person, it's, nobody's interested in me. And for another person is, I don't have what it takes, or whatever it is. We're not even always conscious of it, but we have that cycle. The more we can develop consciousness, meaning the part of us that can see the cycle. Oh, there I go again. The part of us that the uniquely human part of us is consciousness. or the ability to observe ourselves going in those cycles. That is uniquely human. The ability to step outside of our thinking and of our thinking habit loops and say, I don't have to go there. That's old. I've done that for a long time. I've done that really my whole life in some form, and I don't need to go there. Now, the reason I'm bringing it up is because that's uniquely human. So going back to Rav Lowenstein's metaphor of the child in two big clothes, if the human being doesn't know and really develop and exercise their uniquely human capabilities, then those uniquely human capabilities drive them crazy and actually are a source of angst and anxiety for them because they don't necessarily know how to use them. So this is the first level of derech eretz is to be a mensch, to be a good person. And every human being, it can sort of intuit what it means to be a basically good human being. But there's a second level of derech eretz, which really requires Torah, which is sometimes we don't always know what good necessarily means, and we need the Torah that transcendent divine knowledge to define goodness in a way that intuitively we might not define it. So we might not intuitively give 10% of our income to tzedakah, or we might not intuitively hold back on harmful speech, or we might not intuitively do many things that we might not even think are good, or we might do things that we call good that are not ultimately godly. And so we need the Torah to become the best we can be. In other words, we all can intuitively, the human being can get to basic goodness because they're created with an intuitive understanding of what they're capable of. But they need the Torah to get to the unique goodness that isn't always apparent or goes against their drives or even goes against their sense of what's right or wrong. I'm thinking of, for example, the classic story of King Saul. King Saul was commanded by God. This is a little bit hard to understand because it sounds very violent, but to wipe out the nation of Amalek, to literally wipe out the entire nation. According to the book of Deuteronomy, there's one nation that as long as it's on the earth, evil will prevail. It's a beyond the scope of our class. But what happens? King Saul says, that doesn't feel really right. That doesn't feel right to me. And so he commands his officers to save the life of the king, King Agag, and some animals. So the animals I won't get into, but the King Agag, who Saul protects and keeps alive out of his sense of mercy, winds up having relations that night. He's subsequently killed the next night, but that night he has relations with someone, and that someone has a baby, and that baby has a baby, and ultimately the descendant is Haman of the Purim story. So what that really teaches us is we really, and this is hard to always accept, we don't always know what's good. We think, and that's a hard example that I just gave because it's like God literally commanding King Saul to wipe out the nation of Amalek, which sounds very violent. And we'd have to really study that more in depth to fully understand it. But the purpose of this illustration is to say, we really don't always know what's good. We all live in a specific time in history where there are certain wars and certain ways and certain sensitivities and certain inclinations and certain cultural, waves. And we think we know what's right and good, but we don't always. So the very first the very first verse of our Torah is, if there is no Torah, there is no derech eretz. Yes, you can intuitively be a decent person, but to really have ethical, moral behavior, there's a transcendence of one's agenda. There's a learning of a system outside of oneself, greater than oneself, and often in contradistinction to what one's drives are, or what one wants. And so there's no true morality without the Torah. Now, but it goes on, and it says, okay, so im ein Torah, ein derech eretz. Without the Torah, there isn't true moral, ethical conduct, because we really don't always know, left to our own, what that moral conduct is. At the same time, if there's no ethical moral conduct, there's no Torah. So you see what's going on here. In other words, anybody who practices Torah and doesn't behave ethically, it's not Torah they're practicing. So a lot of times people will take examples of corrupt people that are religious. Well, how can they be religious if they did that or this? And the truth is, well, they're not. Because im ein derech eretz ein Torah. If there's not good ethical morality and conduct, then there is no Torah. So the first part of our Mishnah is saying these are symbiotic things. And I'm going to say it really simply so we really internalize it. There's no true absolute morality without Torah. But there's no, sorry, I did it the wrong direction. There's no Torah. Hold on, sorry. If there's no Torah, there's no true ethical morality. But if there isn't true ethical morality, there is no Torah. So these two things are dependent on each other. And the truth is, you'll see in your life all the time that one thing is dependent on another, and that thing is dependent on that. And what we're going to discover is like, so where do you start? The first thing to understand is, okay, there isn't real morality without God's transcendent code for mankind. But without morality, there's no Torah. So in order for me to practice Torah, it has to be practiced on like the fertile soil of being a good person. So that's number one. It then goes on. Im ein chochma ein yira. If there is no wisdom, there is no yira. Now, just like derech eretz has two different definitions or two levels. One is basic menschlichkeit, being a mensch. Another is being a truly refined, moral, ethical individual. And so the Talmud tells us, basic goodness, you can learn loyalty from the ant, you can learn loyalty from the dove, and hard work from the ant. But to be a truly refined, ethical, moral individual, you can't do that without a transcendent code. So that's the two levels of derech eretz. And then we have the two levels of yira. Im ein chochma ein yira, im ein yira ein chochma. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear or reverence. And if there's no fear or reverence, there is no wisdom. Okay, so wisdom without fear of God. So let's look at the word chochma. So there are different forms of intelligence. Like, the joke is that like Eskimos have so many words for snow, because there's so many nuances of different kinds of snow, because snow really matters. I don't think Eskimo is politically correct, but I don't know the right word. Snow has a lot of consequence and importance for people who live in like snow-based environments, or whatever you want to say. Well, Jews have a lot of words for wisdom, and chochma is is basically the best way one way of interpreting Chachma is accumulated knowledge, accumulated wisdom. So wait a second, what is this saying here? If a person doesn't have wisdom, they really can't fear God. But a person can't fear God if they don't have wisdom. Okay, so I read in the commentary on Proverbs from the Ma'iri, wisdom without musar, we've all studied musar, wisdom without learning about God, about fear of God, is like a tent without stakes. There is no use for a tent if it's not tethered to the ground. So we know from history, and we really need to reflect on it, how true and absolutely clear it is that human intelligence is not synonymous with wisdom. We've seen the most intelligent people, and we really have to be careful about this, because in every generation, we're pretty secure that the way we're believing is right. But we've seen over and over again that there can be tremendous intelligence without real wisdom of any sort. So what is it saying? It's saying true wisdom can only be with those who fear God. What does that mean? If I have intelligence and I channel my intelligence constructively in science, in the arts, in philosophy, in anything, that if I use this capacity for intelligence to be the spiritual being that I'm meant to be, because I'm created with a soul, I'm created with intellect, I'm created to use my chachma properly. So if I'm channeling my intelligence to be the fully spiritual being that I'm capable of being, then I will have yira, because I'll use my intelligence to see God in the world through science, through whatever it is. I'll use my wisdom to see the unity of everything in the world, to see God in the world. So I can't get to seeing God if there's no wisdom, because I won't have what to work with. But if there's no fear, there's no real wisdom. So two things so just making this very real for us. The first thing that we need to think about in our own lives is, if I don't have Torah, I can be a good person. But there's a true goodness that transcends my ability to intuit. And for that, I really need to study Torah. But there's no studying Torah if it's not based on being a good person, because there's no fertile soil to learn it in. Okay, so too, if I am not seeking more understanding, then or wisdom, without that knowledge, I can't find God and fear God. So let's just look at the word yira for a second. So a way to analogize yira, the two levels of yira, one is fear of punishment, and one is awe and reverence for the unity of everything that we call God, the unity of all things, just the awe of the world, wow, something so big is happening. There's something so great and unifying. Wow, that's awe and reverence. Yira, there's two levels of yira. Just like there's two levels of derech eretz, there's two levels of yira. So I read an analogy. It's like a child, a little child who crosses the street. So he's careful to cross the street because he knows that if he crosses without looking both ways, he's going to get punished by his parents. So he doesn't do it because he knows mommy and daddy say no. And as the child gets older, he knows I have to look around because there's a consequence to not being careful on this busy street. I could get hurt. So we mature from a fear of mommy said no to it's good for me. It's truly good for me to be careful crossing the street. It's not a great analogy, but it's enough of an analogy of one year to another. One is almost like a fear of the consequences of God running the world and me living unaligned with what God wants for me. And then the other is I love you so much. I don't want to go against you. So there's different levels of yira, but this is the relationship. I need to study and learn in order to deepen my relationship with God, but I can't, and so I need to study and learn to deepen my relationship, but I can't have a deepened relationship if I don't study and learn. Okay, so too, the next one, if there's no knowledge, im ein da'at ein bina, im ein bina ein da'at. Okay, so what is da'at? Dot is translated as knowledge here. So there's chokhmah, bina. So chokhmah is the accumulation of knowledge. Bina is well, we'll skip bina for a minute. We'll do dot. Dot is the bridge between chokhmah and bina. Chokhmah is knowledge, and a lot of times we have a lot of knowledge. People know a lot of things. Like a lot of times you said to yourself or to a loved one, I know what the right thing to do is. I just can't do it. So that's the problem with advice. People, the enormous problem with advice is that we all know what the right thing to do is. I know what the right thing to do is. I just can't do it. So that is the bridge between knowing what's good and internalizing it and manifesting it. So the best way to describe dat is that bridge that binds the human being's intellect. I know what the right thing to do is with their emotions. I desire to do it. I am able to make it manifest. And you'll see, it's even when you see people write books or you see people dedicated to causes, they're usually dedicated to things that they themselves have gone through. Because it's not enough to know about something. It's only when it's so real in your emotional world that you do something about it. So here it's saying, im ein dat ein bina. If there's no kind of bridge between the intellect and the emotions, then you're not bina. Bina comes from the word lahavin, which means to understand or to build. So it's really kind of like creating or making manifest what you know. So if there's no bridge between intellect and emotions, there's no materializing what you intellectually know. But im ein bina ein dat. If you don't make something happen, if you don't fulfill something, you never really cross that bridge between intellect and emotions. So it sounds a little like, what? I didn't get that. The best way to understand that is in your own life. So if I only know things intellectually, then I can't make it happen in my life. I can know what the right thing to do is. I just can't do it. But if I do it, then I truly understand it. I truly understand why it's important. Until we actually do it, we can't truly understand why it's important. And that's why, sometimes we say, just do it. Just do the action, because we can't really understand the importance of something until we do it. But if we do it, and we need to do it in order to understand the importance of it. So it goes in both directions. Okay, last one. Im ein kemach ein Torah. If there's no flour, Flour, or sustenance, there's no Torah. If there's no Torah, there's no flour. Okay, let's put this very simply. You can't think spiritually if your basic physical needs aren't met. Right? You know that Abraham Maslow says that in his hierarchy of needs. A person can't think, what am I here for? What's this about? How can I improve as a human being? How can I overcome my drives towards something better and deeper? And how can I grow? How can I fit into those big sleeves? I've been given so much potential. How can I grow into it? A person can't think about that without their basic physical sustenance met. But, okay, so if there's no kemach, if there's no flour, if a person's basic physical needs aren't met, there's no spirituality. It's not, a person can't think about those things. And then it says, im ein Torah, if there's no Torah, there's no sustenance. So what does that mean? Yes, there is. You can have physical sustenance without Torah. Not really, because real sustenance is not just calories consumed. As it says in the book of Deuteronomy, and it became really famous, and everybody in the whole world knows this, man does not live by bread alone. We're not just like gobblers of like calories and whatever, and that's sustenance. If there's no intrinsic meaning, then there's no real sustenance. And we also really can see that in our own lives. When we have a crisis of spirituality, we can't fill it. We can't fill that hole with physical stuff. It just, one thing is fulfilled, which just leads to another. And when that thing is not met, then we just want something else. So in essence, this is saying is, if there's no spirituality, then no amount of physical sustenance can fill the hole. And I think we've all really experienced that. So we don't live by bread alone. It's not sustaining just to be filled up. So if there's no filling up, you can't focus on spirituality. But if there's no spirituality, then nothing you can do will fill you up. So I don't know how to, maybe as a group, we can open it up now and tie this into a whole package and understand these opposites. I don't really know how to tie it together and say like the overriding message is this. I really don't know exactly what the overriding message is, except to say that we're created, because right before it is really talking about the power of being created in the image of God, that we are created with so much potential. So I think my feeling is what Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah is saying is recognize that there's always like duality, and you cannot have spirituality without refinement, but without refinement, you can't have spirituality. You can't have wisdom without fear of God. But if you don't have fear of God, you can't be truly wise. You can't know things intellectually or truly know things without a deeper understanding and the desire to make it actually happen in your life. But if you don't actually make it happen in your life, you'll never really understand it. If you have no flour, no sustenance, forget about spirituality. But if you don't have spirituality, nothing will fill you up. How to tie this in all together, I really don't know. I think it speaks to the uniqueness of being human and the human condition, and how we can feel less anxious with all of our human capacities. That if we're wearing a shirt that's 10 sizes too big, that's the metaphor of having all these capacities, not knowing what to do with them. We'd be better off not having them. So we want to look at our human capacities and say, we were given all of these unique human capacities to live an actualized spiritual life. I better find out what that is and grow in it in my own way, grow towards something so that I can kind of fit into this shirt. I can fit into the gift of the human capacities that God gave me. But beyond that, I really don't know how to tie this in all together. So maybe the group has some thoughts about this kind of cryptic but interesting Mishnah. So let's open it up and hear from anybody. Anyone have thoughts about this? What this might mean, or what this means to you?
Kelly?
Hi, Susie.
Hi, I have two things to say. First of all, I found this book, Chapters of the Fathers. It's the translation and commentary of Pirkei Avot by the famous Rabbi Simon Shimshon Raphael Hirsch.
Oh yeah,
And
I remember you telling us that.
It was published first in 1967, and I believe it was my grandparents' book. And it's really interesting. I brought it because it's the smallest volume of Pirkei Avot that I have. And some of the words he uses to translate are a little different. Like the first thing Hirsch says that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says is, where there is no Torah, there is no civic society. Instead of just saying a mensch, he's saying a civic society. We can all relate to that, because without a moral base, how can a society exist and be civil? And this is the ultimate. Pirkei Avot is the interpretation of the ethics of the Torah.
Right, beautiful. Yes, go on. How does he keep going with his translation?
So then he said, okay, so if there's no civic society, there's no Torah. Then he says, where there is no wisdom, there is no fear of God. Where there is no fear of God, there is no wisdom. Where there is no knowledge, there is no understanding. Where there's no understanding, there's no knowledge. Where there's no sustenance, there's no Torah. Where there is no Torah, there is no sustenance. But I think those are the words he used. But the explanation says, without the Torah, without the spiritual guidance and moral ennoblement communicated by the teaching of God, any endeavor to establish, maintain, and advance a civilized society on earth will be in vain.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, without derech eretz, if an orderly way of life is not fostered, then the guidance and ennoblement inherent in the Torah lack a foundation on earth.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So what I think this whole thing is saying, in a nutshell, is that the Torah is at the foundation of all these things that we all aspire to. We all aspire to living in a civic society. We all aspire to wisdom. We all aspire to understanding. We all aspire to having enough sustenance to be able to pursue wisdom and understanding. But you can't have any of without the Torah. I think that's what he's saying.
Beautiful. That's terrific. Beautiful. That's excellent.
Well, bringing it down to a more prosaic level, I had a friend in college who used to say, understanding is the booby price, which has stuck with me all of these years, because I think the real question is, how do you bridge the gap between knowing and doing? Because knowing is not enough to do.
That's right.
It's saying we're all capable of giving advice, but very few of us are capable of even following our own advice.
Right. And there's no, from a Torah perspective, there's no value in knowing without translating that into moral, ethical, elevated behavior. Like leaving something in the realm of academic isn't particularly valuable from a Judaic point of view. Because if it's not materialized in human behavior, it's not, kind of back to Susie's like summary, it's not what it's for. It's the sleeves are too big.
But I guess the big question is, how do you bridge that gap between knowing what's right and doing what's right?
Let's continue the question with an example. Give us an example of, I know this is good, I can't do it.
You're not asking me, you're asking everybody for an example, right?
Well, I was asking you, but anybody can type in.
Oh, I mean, a simple example. I mean, you know, you should exercise, but you don't. Or you know, you shouldn't eat, rich food, but you eat too much of it.
I just did.
Or, I mean, there are lots of things, right?
Right. Okay, let's just use this simple example of, not so simple for me, but the simple example of exercise. Right. How do you, so what's the question? How do you bridge the gap between knowing and doing?
Right.
Yeah, Linda?
Sometimes the second part of just doing it is just taking a leap and then being observant in how it feels. And the feeling part is what you like, go with that, and always strive to feel a certain way, which will lead you to do a certain activity or not. And maybe just to break it down is more manageable in anything.
In anything. So Linda, you're saying, take the smallest step of action and begin with the smallest step, but it has to be in action.
And reflect upon it and see how it feels. And hopefully it's going to feel really great. Like, oh yeah, this is really what I want to do. And it might be fuel to do it a second time. But man, taking that first leap, I don't know, it's hard for me too.
Me too. What does Rav Hirsch say about being Susie, are they small little pieces? Does it have Rav Hirsch's commentary on understanding and,
Yeah, it does.
okay, read it, please.
I'm just finding where it is exactly. This is still the Torah part. Okay, without Chokhmah, without the spiritual enlightenment to be derived from the Torah of God, the fear of God will not be properly realized or applied without error. Conversely, without yira, without the fear of God, the endeavor to gather wisdom from the Torah is deprived of its basis, prerequisite, and motivation. Without da'at, the knowledge of the nature and reality of things and circumstances, bina, understanding the good sense to be employed in making judgments and in drawing inferences and conclusions, lacks a factual basis and will dissipate itself in false and unreal imaginings. But conversely, without that good sense with which to test, evaluate, and draw conclusions, da'at, the part of intelligence which constitutes knowledge, may go astray. It will take appearance for reality and will have no protection against error and deception.
Okay. I got a
You
little
know what?
lost.
I think the whole thing is a matter, and I don't do it. I'm just in every way, but I think it's a matter of internalization. I mean, you have to not just say you're going to exercise. You have, and which I don't do. You have to say, I really believe exercise is good for me, and consequently, I'm going to do it. But if you just say, oh, I'm going to exercise 3 times a week, you can find excuses not to, which I certainly do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with everything, somehow you have to make it an intrinsic part of who you are. You have to embrace it with totality in order to convince yourself that it's that to do it.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Well, see, I'm thinking about the exercise example. I mean, my partner, for instance, he exercises because he thinks he should, not because he likes it. So I'm going back to what Linda said earlier, which I think was interesting. You know, take a small step, try it, see how you react to it, reflect on it, see how you feel about it. Hopefully it feels good, and then you do it some more. In this particular example, I don't think it feels good, but he does it anyway because he thinks he should. So, which goes back to something that Allie was talking about earlier, that, you know, willpower is not enough to sustain you. So I'm wondering, well, how much can you will yourself to do something when it doesn't feel good?
Not long.
Yeah.
I think not very long. Not very long. I don't think willpower is a muscle. I don't think it lasts forever. Yeah, Linda.
I think that there, maybe to consider, there are many ways of doing something. And maybe one way doesn't feel good, but maybe another way may. And I mean, that's a track that I've been trying to follow. There's no one best way of doing something. And I'm also trying to free myself from a goal and more of going with the journey itself. So like for your example with exercise, maybe the one thing, maybe some of the things you're trying don't resonate with you, but there could be other things that would.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no one right way of doing anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, Susie, I have to leave soon, but give us a little piece from Rav Hirsch on if there's no sustenance, there's no Torah.
Okay. Without kemach, without sustenance, neither the study nor dissemination of the Torah can be promoted. Conversely, without the Torah, without earnest attention to the moral and spiritual sustenance to be derived through the Torah, the search after purely physical sustenance not only loses all true worth and significance, but actually is destroyed by the outgrowths of crude materialism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, that's pretty resonant with what we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
See, I think this is really, really interesting. You know, it's something that, you know, Renee and I have talked, you know, many times about. It seems to me that all of us are in a position of relative comfort, relative, you know, affluence. I mean, we really don't have to worry about, you know, our physical needs being taken care of. So in a sense, it almost seems like a luxury to be able to study like we are. But I'm assuming that there are many, many people who don't have that comfort, who don't have that, the basic needs met. And it would be very, very difficult, I think, for them to be able to study and absorb and appreciate some of the things that we're talking about.
I really hear that, but as you were talking, I was thinking, gosh, when there's too much flour, there's no desire for Torah. Meaning one of the curses of affluence is the sense of like,
Well, you have it all. You know.
the illusion, what'd you say?
You have it all, you know it all.
Yeah, you have it
know
all. What do I need? I'm
Right.
fine. What do I need? You know, what do I need? You know, I've got this. I don't, so it's funny. You could say when there's no flour, I mean, I've actually seen with my own eyes because there's so much poverty in Israel. I mean, not so much poverty, but there's poverty. It's really true. It has a certain baseline needs to be met in order to pursue spirituality. But I've also seen the converse to be true, that when our needs are met, what do we need this stuff for? What do we need this stuff for? However, then you see, like, I just met all the women from the trip, and it's so amazing to me because you see that everyone really craves spirituality. You have like 30 women who really never thought about any of this stuff, and like they're so hungry to learn more. So I mean, it specifically doesn't say if there's too much kemach, there's no Torah. I kind of, sometimes I think that that affluence really does get in the way of like the spiritual drive. But I think nothing, but I think the person has a pilot light, and it just needs the right environment for it to be ignited. And I'm seeing that now. It's just amazing to see how much, these women are here for 1 week and they want to learn so much more, and they love Israel, and I mean, there's a pilot light in all people. But this here is saying without certain needs being met, no, there needs to be a certain amount of physical needs met.
Well, it's
But,
interesting
yeah,
because-
No
well,
physical, yeah, go on, Stephen.
interesting because I think what we're saying is that at either end of the spectrum, at either extreme, too poor or too wealthy, it may be a little bit difficult to access some of these things that are important.
It seems like that to me. I don't know if that's not what he's saying, but it seems like that to me. Okay, guys, I'm actually taking a walk. It's 58 degrees here in Jerusalem, and Donna Margolis is meeting me downstairs, and I'm taking a walk with her, a nighttime walk.
Give her a
So-
big hug for me.
Yeah, tell her we say
will.
hey.
Tell her hi.
I love you guys. I'm really gonna miss out on Sunday.
Well, we'll tell her.
Maybe
We'll fill
maybe
you
we'll
in.
call in. Really excited about hearing about it.
Okay.
Sending love to
Have a good
everybody.
day. Have a good walk.
Bye, guys.
I
Bye.